floods that happened this last summer in North Dakota, and then the summer before in the Midwest, how has that affected the biodiesel?
Well, it certainly affected you know, the crop last year. There was a lot of acreage that ended up having to be replanted. You know, the Des Moines River and many of the rivers up north had huge flooding last year, and so there was a lot of crops replanted. But it actually ended up being, and if you remember, the flooding as well as some droughts in Australia, as well as primarily energy costs. A year ago we had the adjusted for inflation all-time high. It topped out the all-time high energy price a year ago, last March. Then proceeded to go another 40% beyond that when we hit 157 or $150 a barrel for crude oil, which is ultimately, and that lasted for 3 months, and that was one of the things, along with the credit crisis and everything else, that just strangled the economy and sent us into a tailspin. And so when that happened, when the economy melted down, commodity prices crashed. So the
combination of that plus the flooding was devastating.
Yeah, and so it's just it's extraordinarily volatile and involves a whole range of variables. But that's been the biggest part of it is energy and the volatility of energy. Because if you noticed, 2 years ago, from 2 years ago to last year, the price of crude oil doubled, and then it cut in half, and now it's marching back up again.
So it's hard to know really how to plan, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
Is there any of that bailout money that's been targeted for alternative fuel and energy?
Well, there was some research dollars that went in for that, but actually surprisingly no.
You know, one of the other things was when you say biodiesel, diesel is the half of that, and over in Europe they're having incredible success with the smaller cars running on diesel. They're getting 35, 50, 60, 70 miles to the
Really?
gallon. Oh God, yeah. I mean, Ford makes a car over there that gets, what, 40, 50 miles to the gallon. I think it's a little Fiesta. That's a small car, but again, you know, but we have such a bad taste in our mouth, no pun intended, from the 80s when General Motors pretty much drove a stake in the heart of diesel technology here for automobiles. Any chance, you know, but it seems to me like diesel is much more promising than gasoline in terms of fuel economy.
Yeah, well, diesel is up to 40% more fuel efficient, as all your listeners and drivers out there know. I mean, diesel technology and diesel is the lifeblood of our economy because that's what moves the freight. But the reason it's what moves the freight is because it's so much more fuel efficient, has so much more horsepower. You just can't run a semi-truck in a feasible way on gasoline because it's just not the same BTU and horsepower, durability. You can't run 1,000,000 miles without turning a wrench like you can on diesel technology. And that same technology is available to light-duty automobiles, but we're a country that just had not really valued fuel economy in our personal vehicles for many years. In Europe, they tax energy, and so fuel economy was more important to them. So that's why about half of the vehicles on the road are diesel, because it has just so much more fuel economy.
And they're clean.
Now,
I mean, now they are. Of course, you know, in the past, and we still have that memory of belching black smoke out of stacks and things like that. But that's gone now, with especially with the new 2010 platform coming out.
And you know, an interesting thing is that we refine here in this country. We refine our crude oil for the gasoline, and in Europe they refine it for the diesel fuel. We send them our leftover diesel, finished diesel fuel. They send us their leftover gasoline, and that's one of the reasons why. It's one of the reasons why diesel fuel has, because there is a constriction in petroleum refinery in this country. The petroleum industry hasn't built a new refinery in over 30 years. Because diesel fuel makes up a significantly less proportion of the supply, diesel fuel has a higher sensitivity when crude oil goes up. That's a lot of times why diesel prices shoot up, because it has a disproportionately less amount of the supply to absorb those price shocks. And as we've already said, diesel fuel and diesel is the lifeblood of our economy, and it impacts every single American. And that's that's one thing that most people don't understand.
Yeah.
I'm glad for your show, because I think this is great information. I don't think the average person thinks about that or understands that.
Well,
So
it's not simple, that's for sure. It's really not simple, and it's hard to get a handle on it, because as soon as you squeeze this over here, it's like a balloon. You know, you squeeze one end of a balloon and the other end you try to squeeze it, and you're constantly trying to chase this thing around a little bit, and it's really difficult. Hey, you know what? We just got maybe a couple of minutes before we go to a break. You guys want to? I love that harmonica. Why don't y'all do a little, just a little blues thing for us here as we go into the break? When we come out of the break, though, we'll go right back to some more phone calls. Jobe is with us from the National Biodiesel Board. Michael Peterson is here.